Before getting into this episode, I wanted to mention that the Endurance Podcast is partnering with Move Pre-Workout for this season. I'm delighted by this partnership because Move Pre-Workout is something that I've been using in training for the last year. Here's one of their tubs here. And the formulation with Move Pre-Workout is specifically to help you start sessions properly hydrated, giving you a smooth, sustainable energy and supporting stamina over long efforts. So avoiding any spikes or any issues, making sure that you can do the ride or the run in good form. It's science-led, informed sports certified, and built to fuel performance without disrupting it. If you want to give it a try yourself, and I'd encourage you to do so, please go to movepreworkout.com and put in the word endurance at checkout for 20% off.
Well, a very warm welcome to the Endurance podcast series, this time filming from a very sunny Kendal Mountain Festival in Cumbria. We've been invited down to film a series of these conversations, and it's an absolute pleasure to be back. This is a real mecca of adventure. Now, this is the first time that we've filmed the Endurance podcast series in front of a live audience. Make some noise, live audience. We're normally out in the wild somewhere, having been on a bike ride, so it's amazing to have a live audience as well. So hopefully this will make sense for those in the room, but also who are watching and listening to this in 5-10 years' time. So we're speaking to everyone who cares anything about endurance. By way of introductions and context to the series, the whole purpose of Endurance is to hopefully inspire, but also inform, give people information, hacks, hints, tips to get out there and take on those big ideas. We're not coaching people, we're not telling people how to do what they do, but if we can hopefully help people have the quiet confidence and some ideas to research, look into aspects of who they are, and get out there and take on their adventures. That's what this is all about. And as listeners and viewers will know, teamed up with Reuben Mantle for this series of Endurance. And Martin's on his own amazing endurance mission. Last year going from a ride around Yorkshire, this year riding to the south of France. And next year I'm joining Martin and Jenny Graham and a few other riders to take on the length of Europe from Nordkap in the most northerly point in Norway down to Tarifa, the most southerly point in Spain. So Martin, pleasure to have you back, and we'll hear more about your mega miles and going from, I wouldn't say zero to here. You've done some pretty epic stuff in your career so far, but you're certainly on a mission to push your endurance ambitions, and more from Martin during the pod. But without further ado, let me introduce this morning's guest, Renee McGregor, and I need to read this off to make sure I get it correct. One of the UK's leading sports and eating disorder specialist dietitians, over 2 decades of clinical experience working with Olympians and elite athletes, and lots of people who are not necessarily in the public eye, but just want to go out and take on their ambitions and be healthy at the same time. Hugely respected on her work and thought leadership, and I would definitely encourage you to follow her on Instagram, where she posts some amazing content and ideas. Specifically talking around sports nutrition, REDS, which we'll hear about, the relationship between performance, health, and importantly, mental health. She's also an author of several influential books, including Training Food and More Fuel Now. So, warm welcome this morning to Renee. I'll start off with an obvious one. Renee, you are a local. Kendal is home these days, and you're heavily involved in the festival, so you must be excited to be back.
Yes. Oh, God. Yes, I am local now, and I do love this weekend. It is one of my favourite weekends of the entire calendar year. So, and yeah, always involved in many, many events over the weekend. So by Sunday evening, I definitely am like, shut the curtains, dimmed lights, and probably usually put on some sort of cheesy Christmas movie just to kind of decompress.
And that will make no sense for somebody watching this podcast in 5 years' time, but we are in November. It's an amazing weekend of adventure, and you'll be on stage this afternoon. You're hosting the Endurance stage on Sunday, I think. So there's a lot going on. For those who haven't been to Kendal before, give us a sense of what the festival's about.
I think what I love about the festival is that it is an opportunity to really just enjoy being part of adventure, whether that's just listening or whether that's actually taking part. So there's always so much going on. There's races, there's rides, there's climbs, there's lots of film events, there's a book event, there's lots of books events, and you can be as involved in an adventure as you want to be. And I think that's what I like about it. It's really inclusive. There's also lots of amazing community groups, some very cool workshops going on that I don't think would get under one roof in any other festival. So that's what I love about it.
Yeah, exactly.
Hi, Renee.
Hi, Martin.
I'm going to start with an obvious one too. So, specialise in sports nutrition, as we're aware. This morning, I had a full English breakfast. Mark had a bowl of granola and yoghurt. This afternoon, we're going for a ride up into some of the local hills. The sun's out, it's dry. Who's going to have the best ride based on our breakfasts, and what are the pros and cons?
I think you need to give me a bit more context to what your full English actually included.
Bacon, sausage, fried egg, hash brown, brown toast with butter, fried bread, and coffee.
So probably Mark's going to do a bit better generally. Only
Just because of breakfast?
Well...
We're just going on breakfast?
Yeah, we're just going on breakfast. Yeah. No, I guess the key thing is you want to make sure that when you're doing a big ride, you do want to fuel up on carbohydrates. And although I have no objection to a full English breakfast, like I'm definitely not the food police. I think food is actually a really important part of life. I think it actually is something we should enjoy. And one of the things that I feel quite sad about is that so few people actually now make food choices based on preference and enjoyment. So I don't have an issue with that. But I think where I would say you need to be mindful is when you are going to, you're preparing for some sort of activity, then you might need to think about, well, what's the best food group that I need to include in order to ensure that I can do that activity. That said, what you eat for breakfast is probably not going to make a huge amount of difference to how you ride this afternoon. It's probably what you've done over the last 48 hours that'll make more of a difference.
So last night...
Couple of beers?
Last night I had a couple of beers and a curry.
I mean, did you have rice?
I didn't really. I did have rice. No, I didn't really. So just moving on then. Thanks for that advice. You specialise then in something called REDS. What could you tell us about that?
So RED stands for Relative Energy Deficiency in Sport. It's an interesting choice of title, I'm going to be honest, because actually as it's evolved, it's become more and more complicated, and it's not all just about energy from food. It's actually generally a good way to think about it is the overall energy in the body. So it's underpinned by what we call low energy availability, when there's not enough fuel energy to basically fuel both your everyday biological function, so brain, heart, lungs, just what it takes to be human, and then also all movement. So it's not just training, and again, that's something that people often get confused by. They think, oh, but I don't really train that hard, or I only do like an hour a day, or I only do 90 minutes a day, but they forget about maybe that they walk their dogs 3 times a day, or they've got maybe a job that is more kind of physical than sedentary. And so it's when there's not enough energy in the body to support all these processes going on, the body will always prioritize energy for movement, always. And that's because we've evolved from the kind of hunter-gatherer background where there would have been times of famine where our bodies would need to slow down to kind of preserve energy and just be able to maintain function, as we've talked about. And then there'd be times where they would need to chase food, right, and get food. So there's always been this kind of, we've evolved to be able to run or find food and then consume food. So what will happen is you'll always prioritize energy for movement, and in the meantime, if there's not enough energy left over, so that's that energy availability, then it starts to shut down other processes in the body. It's not a quick procedure, like it will take time. And generally what we know is that it can start as early as 3 weeks of being in chronic low energy availability. But what I find personally is that symptoms don't really start showing sometimes up to 18 months later. And that can also be quite confusing for the individual, because they're like, well, I've been doing this for 18 months. I've had some great performances during that time. So why is it now a problem? And fundamentally, it's because it's just not sustainable. You know, the body does everything in its power to try and keep us moving and keep us going. And at some point, it just goes, I can't do this anymore. So in the meantime, lots of functions are being shut down. A bit like, you know, when our phone is on low battery mode and it starts to switch off those kind of non-essential apps. It's kind of like that. And so different parts of our biology get switched off, and it can affect people in many different ways. And I think that's the other thing that's important to highlight, is that it is not a one picture fits all. Like, people present with very different presentations, and it can happen to anyone, male or female. It can happen whether you're recreational level or elite level. There is no one size fits all. And I think it's become more and more common to talk about RED-S, and lots of athletes are coming forward saying, you know, I had this, and in some cases it was career over because there was no understanding of what was going on and how to support an athlete in that time. But also, I think partly it started to confuse the messaging as well about what it is and also how you recover from it. So that's something that I absolutely kind of invite people to be talking about their lived experience and what it's done, because I think it's important. We need to raise awareness so it doesn't keep happening. But I also think it is a complicated clinical condition that needs to be managed appropriately.
Because it is such a huge topic, I mean, clearly we could fill the entire conversation and more with that. The thing I would like to capture is just putting it on people's radar, and for people to be aware that, you know, if they're having a whole range of symptoms in their lived experience, I don't want to just make this about athletes, you know, understanding those long-term habits, things. It could be related to nutrition, it could be other things to do with their exercise, their training, which might be showing up in different ways, which could have long-term effects. I think it's amazing the research that you've done on it. Can you give us some pointers where to go with that conversation? Because I'm aware that, you know, we could speak all day about that alone. I'm quite interested to pick up on something that you said a minute ago about the human body prioritizing movement. I want to come back to that point, but before we do that, if people are new to the conversation around RED-S, where would you take them? I know you've done some amazing other podcasts and conversation about it, some of your other research. Is that where you point people to first?
Yeah, and I think, like you said, I've written a few books, but the last two books, so Fuel for Thought, which came out earlier this year, and More Fuel You, goes into a lot more detail about what to expect. And as you said, Mark, it's not all just about food. I think there's a big part of it is about under recovery, and I think societally we are definitely normalizing over exercising quite, you know, which I think is problematic. And that's not problematic because exercise is, I mean, it's something we should all do, but I think it's problematic because often people are trying to train like athletes as well as hold down a full-time job and be parents and everything else. And so their time is getting squeezed, their recovery is becoming squeezed, and that in itself can then also generate some of these symptoms that we often see. So yeah, I think if people want to know more about RED-S, like you said, I've done many podcasts on it, but I also have several books on it. And actually, my Instagram account really did start as just a bit of an education platform so that it was information that was accessible to all. You don't have to necessarily just come and work with me. You can, you know, understand it through that.
Wonderful. I do want to pick up on your point saying that the human body always prioritizes movement, because my lived experience with ultra-endurance events is that often people train like hell, get in the best shape of their lives, and then during ultra-endurance events, the thing that fails them is not their legs, is their gut. And so this idea of, as you go into ultra-endurance, and I especially mean sort of multi-day, multi-week, you know, that's something that people often haven't trained, they haven't got that lived experience of. So they can be as fit as they can be and ready as they can be, but the things that surprise them and often mean they don't complete is psychological and nutritional. So I don't know if you get any thoughts on what's happening in terms of the function of the gut and your digestion during the stress of ultra endurance. Because maybe I've got it wrong, but I've just always assumed that as people who are not conditioned to ultra endurance go into that space, the body's prioritizing other things, and your digestion actually slows down. But have I got that wrong?
So what normally happens is that whenever we are participating in movement, especially like kind of at a certain intensity, the blood flow will be sort of directed away from our digestion and to our muscles, because that's where the energy needs to go. So this is why sometimes, particularly when people are working at a very high intensity, you can get something called ischemic gut, which is where obviously there's no blood flow, and that's the worst case. And sometimes that can present as blood in stool and, you know, some really nasty symptoms. But I think in general, one of the main reasons why gut issues become problematic is, firstly, when you're doing these ultra distance events, and as you said, if you're doing it day after day, to remember that we are human and we have circadian rhythms. And so when you're kind of pushing against circadian rhythm, the gut sort of has times where it's more active and times where it's not so active. So, you know, I do a lot of work with the GB 24-hour team, and I was supporting one of the athletes this year. And one of the things we talked about was actually how do you manage your intake at night, because technically at night, when, you know, it's dark, our melatonin picks up it's dark, and you basically want to go to sleep, right? And so actually the gut also slows down. So it's not necessarily just about the physical, it's also about what's going on. And I guess that's one of my biggest learnings from the work I've done, is that we're not textbook. We are living, breathing organisms. And I think people forget that. I think they try and train and control their bodies way too much. And actually in doing so, sometimes you create the worst environment for your body to survive in those situations. But things you can do from an endurance point of view is obviously training your gut is really key. So actually taking the nutrition you're going to try and take on long bike rides or long runs is obviously a key thing. Staying hydrated is another really important one. But I think also understanding that if you're going to be going for over 24 hours, inevitably you probably are going to get some gut distress, and it's probably not to panic, and kind of to know little tips that you can use during that time so that you don't just throw the towel in and just realize that, okay, this might be something I have to go through to come out the other side. I mean, I'm not saying push through like really extreme gut issues, but I think it's just understanding that sometimes we do have to acknowledge that, okay, I'm not used to moving for 24 hours, so maybe I need to think about this is just parcel of that.
The Endurance Podcast is brought to you in partnership with Enjoy Travel. Huge thanks for all that they do. And I don't need to introduce my co-host, but over to Martin Mantle to explain Enjoy Travel.
So Enjoy Travel brings you car hire, hotels, airport parking lounges with a loyalty platform, meaning you buy 9, you get your 10th free. And you can mix and match across any range of our products. You don't need to just buy 10 car hire, you could buy a hotel, a car hire. And we're giving you a special discount code to celebrate our podcast, which is RID3R, as in rider, and you'll get up to 30% off everything.
So click on Enjoy Travel. It's been amazing for these epics, makes our travel so much more enjoyable and seamless. So thanks Martin, thanks Enjoy Travel.
I'd like to move on to a different topic slightly now, because you specialise not only in sports nutrition, but also mental health, and in particular eating disorders, which is quite a unique blend of specialisms to bring together. And your background is, and I know you're okay for us to talk about it, you had your own eating disorders when you were a child as well. So I'm wondering if you could tell us just a little snapshot of what kind of eating disorder you had, what it entailed, what was the journey from there to where you are with the successful career you've got today, and how kind of that shaped you into where you are now.
Yeah, of course. I had anorexia, and it started probably when I was age 13. I was pretty poorly for quite a long time, and obviously I'm nearly 50 now, so that was a very long time ago, and there wasn't an awful lot of knowledge or understanding. I mean, there's not that much even now, so you can imagine all that time ago there was even less. And it was I think what was really interesting is obviously I come from an Indian background. Both my parents are Indian. I was born in the UK, but my parents are Indian. And so also it wasn't really recognised in someone who wasn't white. So although I ticked the teenage box, I didn't come from a middle-class family, and I was Indian. So it actually got missed a lot. And I'll be honest, I don't remember a lot of those early few years, but what I do remember is that I never felt understood, and I never understood my eating disorder. I was constantly given advice on restoring my weight, and that was pretty much it. And it was a pretty horrific experience in terms of the way in which that was encouraged at home with my parents. And I think that's really unfair to also put that on parents, because instead of bringing the family close together, it just really created more and more problems and more fractures, I would say.
And just for anybody listening that may not be aware, what are the kind of main symptoms of anorexia? What are the conditions? What happens? What is it?
So I lost weight very rapidly.
Because it's not just about losing weight.
No,
obviously.
And it wasn't. And I think the thing that's obviously, it's hard to kind of separate what I know now to where I was when I was 13. Yeah. When I was 13, what I would say is I just didn't feel good. I felt a real deep dis-ease within myself. I just didn't like anything. I didn't like how I was. I didn't feel like I fitted in. I was very lonely at school. Again, I had a lot of issues fitting in because I was the only Asian girl in school, and I went to an all-girls private school, and I'd got a scholarship to get in there. So I didn't come. I lived in a flat above a shop on a council estate, and everybody else around me had big, massive houses in Surrey. So I never fitted in. I was always on my own, and it was very lonely. And I just remember just feeling like I was all wrong. That's probably what I can say to you, is I felt wrong. And I guess, I was 13, and I assumed that maybe if I just tried to look a bit more like everybody else, then maybe they'll like me. I'm assuming that's what went through my mind. Obviously, it was a long time ago, but I just remember I just wanted to stop feeling how I felt. And it started, I was really active. I've always been really into sports. So I used to play lots of hockey and netball, and I was good. I was in all the teams, and I did a lot of dance as well. So, and I'd been a swimmer as a kid, so I'd done all that swimming, all you do, you go to swimming morning and evening. I'd done all of that. So I was really active. But I guess because I was active, I was eating a lot of food and eating a lot of, snacks. And so the first thing I did was just stop snacks, no snacks, no treats. And then slowly, it was okay, I don't really need breakfast. And I can skip lunch because nobody even cares. Nobody even notices that I'm not in the lunch hall. And then I started, I suppose, avoiding evening meals or saying, I had a really big lunch, the usual kind of behaviours that are employed. And my weight dropped very rapidly. And I guess the thing about anorexia is you don't see it. So no matter how much everybody was telling me that this is problematic, I didn't see it as a problem. I just knew that I needed to be as small as possible, and somehow that kind of helped me to feel numb, I guess.
And how poorly did you get? Can you remember where was the lowest point? How poorly did you get, and what kind of there must be more symptoms than just losing a huge amount of weight?
I was very poorly. I feel like I won't say the weight number because I don't want to cause any triggering for anybody else. I was very ill. I lost my period. When I was finally seen, and I was seen at the Maudsley Hospital, so when I was finally seen there, they told me I literally had days to live. So the fact that I'm here is hopefully a good thing.
Wow.
But I always remember this, and I'm going to say this because I want to lighten the mood a little bit. But what I want to say is, one thing the doctor said to me was, "You've got really strong feet." And I always remember I've held on to that. So whenever I'm in an ultra and I'm getting tired, I'm like, no, I've got really strong feet. It's fine. So, but yeah, I don't know why he made that comment, but I always remember that comment. It took a long time to recover. I'm not gonna sit here and lie. It took a long time to recover. It was backwards and forwards. I did what I had to do. I restored back up to a normal weight so I could be discharged. But as soon as I got discharged, I fell back into old patterns because nobody was watching me, and I didn't understand it. And I guess that's a really big part of my work now, is helping people to understand what the purpose of their eating disorder is, like what it does. And for me now, I know, and this has been years and years of like studying, researching, obviously working in it, is that for me it was a defense mechanism because I felt I didn't feel good. I felt problematic. I didn't belong. Nobody wanted me, including my own family. So I had experienced sexual abuse as a very young child, and that was probably the trigger, if I'm honest, and in the way that was handled by my parents, and I guess set up a sense of being a massive disappointment. I let that happen, and I shouldn't have, was kind of the general narrative. So yeah, it's been a long journey. So now when I work with people, we don't really talk about food to start with. We just talk about what's going on for them and try and get them to understand why they might need a defense mechanism. Because to be honest, if we think about all our behaviors, that's what they are, right? All our behaviors are a way of avoiding usually something that's uncomfortable for us or something we're unwilling to feel. And so, even if you think about lying, you think about children, young toddlers who lie. I didn't do that. I didn't draw on the wall. Like, it's because they know they're going to get told off, and they learn very early that if I say that, then maybe I won't get told off. Like, we all do it in our daily life. Even now I can say sometimes I'll blame the dog if I trip over. It's not the dog's fault. It's my fault for not really paying attention to what's in front of me. And I think that's where I wanted. I never thought I'd end up working in eating disorders. I'll be brutally honest. Like, it was a journey. I was functional for a long time. I went through uni, but actually it was becoming a dietitian that really changed things for me, because I started working at St George's Hospital as my first job, and I was basically thrown in front of lots of different specialities, not eating disorders, just like gastro, oncology, max fax, you name it. And when you're put in front of someone who can't eat because they're ill, and you've made the choice not to eat when it's a privilege, that really opened my eyes up. I'm not saying it's the thing that fixed me, but it really opened my eyes up. And then I guess and I think that's it then, that kind of supported me, that made me, and I wanted to be a good dietitian, so I wanted to be a good role model. And I guess the next then was when I became a mum, because I became a mum quite young. I fell pregnant at 26, and I had my first daughter 2 weeks after I turned 27. And that, for me, was the turning point, in the sense of, I do not want my kids or my daughter to ever feel any of the things I feel and end up in the same place as me. So I need to be a really good role model. And that was really, I think, probably the turning point in terms of completely letting go. But as we know, an eating disorder the recovery is not linear, and it's never perfect, but it is completely possible. And I would sit here all these years later, hand on heart, saying I don't have any issues with food or my body or exercise. But what I will say is I still have those thoughts of, I'm not good enough, I'm a problem, I'm a highly sensitive individual, and I feel life intensely, and I hate people suffering, and I also feel, I guess, criticism very intensely. So those sorts of situations do make me sort of want to shut that down again, but I guess because I'm aware of it, because I have so much self-awareness, I'm like, okay, well, we don't need to go down that route. We've got a healthier alternative now. And I guess that's what it is, right? It's finding a healthier alternative to manage some of those difficult emotions. So yeah, that's been my journey.
It's obviously when we were growing up, there wasn't social media. There is now. And again, following what you speak about online on social media, the thing that comes across a lot is not just the fact that everything you speak about is backed by data and research, but that there's a huge amount of sort of empathy and engagement with the person and the people. It's not just sort of facts and figures and, the latest research in. Something you speak quite a lot about is because people, I would say people broadly, but athletes who are taking on challenges are often sort of looking at versions of what they want to be and comparing themselves to others. You've spoken quite brilliantly about, body types and who you are. And, I'm 6'3" and nearly 100 kilos. If I had a pound for every time somebody met me and, because they see you on telly and then they meet you in person and go, oh, you're big. And, because I don't look like the average professional bike rider. Mm-hmm. And, it doesn't bother me at all. But it after 2 decades of being an athlete, it does make me chuckle when people meet me in the real world and that their first comment is, most professional cyclists are not nearly 100 kilos. And there's just this idea of what a professional cyclist looks like. I know that's something that you speak quite a lot about, which is, you can't be somebody else. You can't be somebody else's body type. You are what you are. I've heard you chat before about, look at the Christmas photograph, look at the family photograph of the people standing around you. You can't fight against genetics. You are, you might look like a version of your brothers and sisters and dad and mum, but you're all off the same tree. And that's a really interesting starting point, as opposed to looking like, some American influencer on Instagram, because guess what? You're not part of their family. And it's we can laugh about these things, but when you were growing up at school, you were comparing yourself to the girls in your school. These days, my 2 daughters can compare themselves to anyone on planet Earth on social media, which is, an incredibly confusing space to be in. So I'm very conscious we've only got sort of 10, 15 minutes left in the conversation, and that's a very expansive point. But the work you do now, given your own lived experience, to now bring research and understanding, but also that level of empathy to people. I mean, I'm glad you've written the books, because it means that people don't have to have private clinics and sessions with people like yourself if they can't access that. They can just go away and research it for themselves. But I mean, how do you capture this conversation about a person, whether they're an endurance athlete or not? You have to start with who you are, and you can have all the data in the world, but ultimately, the canvas is the canvas that you've got to work with. And I think as an athlete, I often miss that, because I was, working by power ranges, or the data that I had, or the glucose monitor. And I mean, all these bits of input were really, really important to my recovery and, the effort that I put in. But I think what I would often lose in that sort of conversation around numbers was, how do I feel? Mm-hmm. And I would never actually stop and ask how I felt. There would almost be a real victory with training through when you felt like death warmed up. And maybe there is some grit and resolve and psychological strength that comes from that. But I definitely think towards the end of my career, where I was doing stuff like the North Coast 500 record, I was riding by numbers, which gets you to a certain point, but certainly doesn't capture the kindness, if that's the right word, and the empathy that you bring to working with people, which is actually, have an understanding of how you feel, as well as bringing sort of data and research into your work. So if you meet, I keep saying athletes because this is the endurance podcast series, but if you meet people who are very goals driven, who are very focused on what they're trying to do, how do you encourage them to broaden out and use information well, but ultimately, have that sort of kindness and empathy and remembering who they are, as opposed to sort of the robotic version of yourself? Is there a trick to that, or is that sort of session 5 and sort of it takes a while to get to that point? You need to unpackage a lot of the way people think.
It definitely takes a while to get to that point. I don't think it's a straightforward, you can go in there with, this is what we're going to do. I think I think the biggest gift I hopefully give people who come and work with me is that I offer a space where they feel heard. You know, I think it's often one of the things that people always say to me at the end of a session is, thank you for hearing me. And it's not, you know, it's not necessarily what I set out to do, but I guess that was one of my things I've learned just from the work I do, even when I was working in the high performance world, you know, with Paralympic athletes going out to Rio, is that a lot of them just felt like commodities, and they didn't feel like humans, and they weren't treated as humans. And actually, when someone goes, how are you doing today? Like, let's forget all the expectations that's been placed on you, what's going on for you. And they feel like they can actually be honest, and they can actually kind of say, actually, I'm finding this really hard, or I'm knackered, but I feel like I've got to keep pushing forwards. And then you start opening that conversation. So for me, the first place is always building trust. And, you know, I guess ultimately, and maybe this won't be the most popular thing to say, ultimately, I believe in health before performance. And I think unless you have both your physical and your mental health, then you can't really perform sustainably. You might have the one or two odd great performance, but you can't have longevity in the game. And so to answer your specific question about kind of if someone's very goal orientated, how do you get them to sort of start looking inwardly? You find ways in which they get to that point themselves. So, for example, I was working with a cyclist the other day, and we were talking about the fact that she just wasn't seeing the numbers output that she expected to see because she was putting so much work in. And I know from looking at her blood tests and looking at her nutrition and listening to her that she's put herself in a hole. She's doing too much, and actually she can't adapt because she's putting too much in. So I kind of made the suggestion that she just took a few days off, and I said, look, we're not saying it's forever, just saying just take 2 days off. Let's see how you feel. She took 2 days off. She then went back on the bike and she hit her numbers. And it was a really good way of just helping her to see it. But there's a good tip, and it's not a tip that has come from me. It's something, again, you learn just from research, is that often people won't stop something because they're fearful of what the outcome will be. You know, if I don't train 18 hours a week, then I won't get the performances I've had previously. And a good trick is kind of say, okay, what do you really think the percentage of that is true? Like, if you didn't train for 18 hours, like if you, let's say we train for 12 hours a day, 12 hours a week, what's the percentage that you won't have that performance that you're looking for? And they might look at me, because, like, again, when we're stuck in our heads, we're not very rational. But when someone offers you that question and they kind of take a step back and they go, well, maybe it's only like 5%. I say, okay, well, that's a gamble worth taking, right? 5%. And if it is true, then you can always go back to your 18 hours a week again if you want to. And they often then they go, okay, I can do that. That feels like a bit of a challenge that I can take. Because again, you're playing into their mindset, their challenge mindset. So they'll do that. And then they go, oh yeah, I feel so much better. And I'm like, okay, well, maybe we do that for another week and see what happens. You know, and so it's not, I wouldn't say there's a one size fits all. I think Martin and I were chatting earlier, and I kind of over the last 10, 15 years, when I've sort of moved away, I guess, from clinical dietetics and moved more into the sports world and more into the mental health world, I've done a lot of study and extra study, and I now have lots of different modalities that I can use with clients to help them. And it will really vary depending on what they throw in front of me on that day. So it's not like I go in with a ready-made program or plan. It's just very much what they need in that moment.
Amazing. And I know that talking about being ready for the moment, Martin and I are keen to start to close off the conversations, but without, it would be remiss to not chat about the big challenge next year. So over 3,000 miles, top to toe.
3,500 miles.
3,500
So
miles in 2 weeks. So going about 200 miles a day.
220 average miles a day on the current route for
And
just over 2 weeks. There's a record. It's a slightly different route, a tiny bit longer. It's got a downside that it goes through Russia, so we're not doing that. But that's the premise that we want to do. We want to go faster than the last guy did cycle the full length of Europe. So it's Nordkapp, which is the very most furthest northerly road of Norway, very very top of Norway, about 200 miles into the Arctic Circle. That's the start. The finish is Tarifa, the very furthest southerly road in Spain. It's around about 3,500 miles on the planning we've done. The target would be under 16 days, so that's average 220 miles a day. Hopefully that adds up if anyone's really fast at maths.
And what we love about sort of the cooking up this concept was to have a mixed team as well. You know, there's no point in sort of Martin going off on his own or myself or Jenny. This idea of sort of buddying up and supporting each other. And you know, this idea of having a series of conversations through the first half of this year, next year with the Endurance podcast series, and then finishing with this epic event, sort of trying to put all this wisdom into practice with a big rise mixed team, trying to give people the quiet confidence, not just to hopefully watch and enjoy the adventure, but just to think, well, what's my version of that? So it's interesting because I know that Renee, you work with somebody who's my sports nutritionist for the Around the World in 80 Days, Ruth McKean. So surrounding yourself with great people who have given me great advice before. So without trying to sort of poach your wisdom for what we're taking on next year, any headline thoughts going into this epic 3,500 mile race the length of Europe?
I guess the things that come to mind are, as we talked about earlier, carbs are your friend, so that's the big thing, but also practicing your nutrition, and I'm sure you're going to do a lot of training ahead of this, so practicing your nutrition and also thinking about when you have a trip like you've planned and you're moving through different countries, it's also being conscious of what's going to be available. So I don't know if any of you are going to go and watch Deo Cato's film or his talk over the weekend. He basically ran the whole length of Africa to raise awareness about migration. And I was part of his support team, and that was one of the challenges we had, was as he moved through different countries, what was available, and obviously what you take with you will run out, and how do you make that work? And so, you know, I'd often get these like interesting photos from a tiny little supermarket in the middle of Uganda, and he'd be like sending me a video going, will this do for protein? And I'm like, yeah, that'll be good. Have you got this as well? You know, it's a really good way of kind of like helping him. So I guess the key thing is you can obviously prepare really well while you're in the UK, but sometimes in some of the more maybe kind of smaller countries where you might not get always what you need, it's good to kind of be prepared. And a really good tip is if you run out of electrolytes, go to a pharmacy and just use Diarrolite or the equivalent, because that gives you exactly the same thing. So actually it's a cheap trick for anybody who wants a cheap trick. The other thing about another cheap trick is actually skim milk powder, which you can pick up in a lot of places, because it was something that was used many, many years ago, and it's really cheap. It's cheap as chips. And skim milk powder, if you actually add that to, you can kind of fortify that up, and you can actually make a really high protein enriched milk, which again could be a great source of recovery for you as well. So you don't always need to kind of have really expensive products with you. You can actually do quite a lot with just supermarket owned, but you just need to know what to do.
Where are you going? I remember that on the Africa carried to Cape Town, I had to compromise my safety in certain parts and hang my helmet underneath my handlebars, the tri-bars, and use it basically as a food basket. And, you know, I would, it was so far between supply points that I would have, you know, lots of packets of biscuits, and sometimes I would use it as a basket for chips. Tanzania and Zambia, you just get piles of chips wherever you are. So, yeah. And the trick when you come back from these expeditions is you're used to just eating the packet of biscuits, and then you come back and you have to remember that in polite society you have one or two biscuits, not the entire packet. Cakes, the same apply. It's amazing, and there's what you've managed to capture in the last 45 minutes, Renee, is really just sort of touching on 4 or 5 topics, which, you know, each deserve a book and a podcast to themselves. But hopefully for the audience in the room, but also for those who are watching and listening afterwards, if you've not come across Renee's amazing work before, please follow, please subscribe. I noticed that The Guardian is this week got one of your books top of the list for gift ideas for Christmas for sporty folk, and I couldn't agree more. So the low bar here is that hopefully we've put Renee on the radar for those who weren't following, and there's so many parts of that conversation which people can dig in more to. I know you've got a very busy couple of days ahead at the festival, so we wish you well with that. And you mentioned family before. I know your daughter's actually on the stage doing some presenting as well. That must be a very proud moment.
Yeah, she's actually on the Yeti stage, or at the front of base camp today, right now, doing her first interview for a book event, which I am very proud of. But she's also presenting at a lot of the films. So if you see Renee McGregor, she is my daughter, so give her a wave. She's a bit nervous, but she's great.
I do have a last topic, if we've got a few minutes.
Yep.
That various people have asked me to just quickly touch on, really quickly, maybe no more than a minute on each one. So we could call it niche diets. So people who want to lose some weight, they want to do a specific thing, generally lose some weight. Is it a good thing? Is it a bad thing? Any pros, cons, watch outs? So the first one I'll ask about is, I guess it's a kind of version of Atkins diet. So I've got a friend or somebody I know, all he'll eat is meat. He won't have carbs. No potatoes, no veg, no salads. He eats meat, chicken, it could be anything. He can drink coffee. Pros and cons.
I mean, pros, you're going to hit your protein requirements. Cons, obviously not great for the gut microbiome, which we know has so many implications for positive health and mental well-being. Probably also, depending on the meat he chooses, maybe slightly higher in saturated fat, so potentially puts him at a higher risk of cardiovascular disease. And also just generally, just the lack of variety, I would say. Probably get a bit of taste fatigue. That's like top facts.
Yeah.
I mean, it wouldn't be something I would recommend personally.
Okay. Second one, so this person eats nothing, no breakfast, no lunch, only eats in the evening. He's okay to drink coffee or water. He can drink, but not sugary drinks. So no breakfast, no lunch, only eats in the evening. Good or bad?
Again, probably a negative from me. I think one of the things to remember is, firstly, that the human body likes regular nutrition. It helps to keep our blood sugars nice and constant, which we do need, because we need our blood sugars to be a certain number for our brain to work, which I think people seem to forget in this day and age of everybody panicking about insulin and glucose spikes. Actually, insulin's not so bad. It's actually quite good for us, particularly if we're active. We need it. The other thing is that if you do this kind of fasting approach.
Fasting diet, that's it, yeah.
Yeah, the problem is that, again, the human body is very, very good. It's biologically hardwired to meet energy balance. So what will often happen is that once you start eating, it will really struggle to turn that off, because it's like, well, I need to eat more food because I don't know when you're going to feed me again. And during the time when you are fasting, your metabolism does tend to downregulate. And so actually all the things that you think you're doing for yourself, you're not, because the body can't really work that well.
The third one is my business partner, won't name him, Steve. He has a kind of special, without saying the brand, a specialist nutrition drink for his breakfast, potentially for his lunch too. So he thinks it's amazing. It's got like 400 calories or whatever. It's got the vitamins, protein. It's hard to argue with him about it. I mean, I don't know why I don't believe it. It's a good thing, maybe, but I don't.
So what is this, like a meal in a bottle?
It's like a meal in a bottle.
Okay.
Yeah. So, yeah, I can't understand the pros of it, but it's got everything you need in a bottle, but less calories, I guess. And then you can eat a proper meal in the evening. Pros, cons, good, bad. What would you say to Steve?
What would I say to Steve? I would say it feels quite sad that you're not actually enjoying food.
But you could enjoy the drink, though. It's a tasty drink.
Is it?
I don't know. He'd say it is.
I mean, I think this is quite interesting because I get a lot of people who do very similar, or they make their own and then they throw in all sorts of weird ingredients. And I'm like, do you really enjoy it? And they're like, no, not really, but it's just convenient. And again, it goes back to food is love, right? Food is like when you sit around a table and you're eating food, you're connecting with the people you love. And I think that's probably the most important thing for our well-being. And I get a bit sad that we've made food so functional.
And chewing. And
chewing is really
and
important. Yeah, really important.
Teeth health and whatnot.
The other thing I would say is that, just kind of before, don't want to kind of ramble on too long, but we really need to move away from everything being about calories, because it's becoming more and more clear from recent studies, particularly with the work that's coming out of from Kevin Hall, is that actually calories are kind of pointless. They don't really help us to eat well. You need to think about the nutrient density of your diet, and that's so much more important than just whether you're eating 400 calories or not.
And obviously, 400 grams of calories in a chocolate bar or a fruit salad is a very different thing.
Yeah.
Was there one last one?
There's one last one, which isn't so much a diet, but it's a massive trend at the moment, which is the weight loss jabs. So I know a few people doing this, and my understanding of it is it can be hugely, or it generally is hugely successful at the beginning. They quickly lose a lot of weight because it kind of suppresses their appetite. It makes them a bit less hungry. They can still eat, but they want to eat less. It can stop them drinking alcohol as well. It takes away the desire for alcohol. But then a year later, they're still taking it to maintain that lower weight, which potentially could be okay. I don't know. But could it be a positive thing? Is there some positivities around it? And what's the long-term possible impact if they have to keep taking it, let's say, for the rest of their lives, so they don't start piling weight back on?
So I actually wrote my first ever Substack on this because I do have some concerns around them. I think, let's just put this into context. Some demographics will highly benefit from being on weight loss jabs. That's what the weight loss jabs have been designed for.
Which demographics, though?
So generally the obese population,
okay,
or people who've got type 2 diabetes due to being overweight or carrying more weight, or people maybe with joint issues. But at the moment, really, a GP can only prescribe it to people who are either got a BMI above 40 or who have one or two of the other conditions we've just discussed. The problem I have with it is it's become very easy to obtain online, privately, and nobody is assessing the individuals that are accessing it. And so you've now got people who are maybe just slightly overweight, or who've just always really struggled to lose those last few stubborn pounds or whatever, going on it. And I think for them, it can be really detrimental to their health. Like, I've got a lot of colleagues in the medical world, like one's an anaesthetist, one's a gastro specialist nurse, just kind of to give these two examples. And they're both saying that they're finding it's really problematic in terms of when people are coming in for surgery, because in the past, you would tell someone to fast for 24 hours and then that would clear the gut and that would be okay to then provide anaesthetic or to do the procedure. And now with the GLP-1s, because one of the mechanisms it works on is really slowing transit time through the gut. So you've got like 3-4 days worth of food sitting in your gut, which just to me is really not appealing anyway. So we know that it's probably going to be, there are lots of detrimental implications. And actually what we talked about earlier in terms of low energy availability, that is another big issue, because if you're not able to eat because it's got this appetite suppressant aspect, then you're going to get to a point where maybe you're not even eating enough to support biological process. And that can then lead to, actually, I think we'll see more and more people in the kind of general public who are on these medications that are going to present with the red light symptoms that we're seeing in athletes and active people. And I think it's too early for that at the moment because it's relatively new. But as I said, symptoms can start around 18 months to 2 years. So I think we've still got that to come.
So what could be then, over 2 or 3 years, let's say, what could potentially be the the worst case that someone that's been taking it for 2 or 3 years could start to see? And could it potentially be too late by then, or is it always going to be okay to stop and you'd have time to get better?
So I think my biggest concerns will be downregulation of the endocrine system. So particularly for women who might be in their 30s and want to have children, actually their fertility might become affected. And similarly, for both men and women, if you get a downregulation of the endocrine system, then you also get a downregulation of your bone health. And so it puts you at a much higher risk of stress fractures and fractures.
Okay.
And I think that the final thing would be that if you've been on something like that for 2 or 3 years, is actually we can't ignore the psychology that's going to have an effect, and the anxiety that will be developed in not taking it, and what that might mean for that person. So I think it's very early days, but I know the medical world is concerned, and I know that obviously the nutrition world is concerned as well. But it's a complicated world we live in, so I understand why people think they need to take it.
I think that one of the biggest learnings I'm taking away from this conversation is sort of do your research, be careful who you listen to. I think we should all listen to people like yourself, Renee, an absolute font of knowledge and wisdom. And I also find it inspiring people who have taken their own lived experience and then turn it into their career. Now that's inspiring as well. I want to make sure that for the live audience, you don't run late for your next events. Thank you so much for turning out early, right at the start of the festival, for this conversation, the live endurance podcast series. So on behalf of Martin and myself, please a big round of applause and thank you for Renee McGregor.